let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaining, feedism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming to the show a good friend of ours. We've got AJ.
Hi, everyone.
How are you, doll?
Great here. Excited to be on for the first time ever.
We're very excited to have you on. We've had some good chats. In fact, you've already been on a live stream with us for our Thicc streams, which is fabulous. So I'm sure our audience are already familiar with your work. But we're very excited to chat to you today. So listen, babe, are you ready to just get straight into it?
I'm ready. Let's chat. Let's get to it.
Fabulous. So listen, today we're going to be talking about something. Tim and I have talked about this in the past. We have a tendency to kind of coin new terms, new phrases that I think people in the community are kind of already on board with, right? Like, not just to say pulling shit out of thin air, but what we're talking about today is what we call fatfishing, which is a concept that actually, when explained, I think a lot of people are very familiar with, right?
Sure.
So obviously this is rooted in the phrase catfishing, which is, for anyone who does not know, it's where someone posts images pretending to be someone they're not, okay? With fatfishing, it's a little bit of the same, but it's where people post photos and content pretending to be fatter than they are, bigger or larger, or even more muscular than they are. I mean, as a first point of query, is that a concept that you've seen demonstrated or something you're a little bit familiar with yourself?
Absolutely. I think we, as a society that focuses so much on internet presence currently, we're always trying to make ourselves look better online and impress people, regardless whatever that capacity means and whatever kind of beauty standards we're aiming towards. I think that there is that intent to look bigger and better, if you will, for the sake of this argument. But people can kind of take that a little bit too far or put themselves through a specific filter or altering program that sometimes doesn't come across as authentic as it could. I really wanted to bring this subject up with the two of you because it's something that I'm passionate about authenticity and representing an authentic, true self. But I didn't want to come into this podcast being negative or pointing fingers. I really wanted to try and get to the root issue of why people might kind of allude to something that they're not, or try and understand that everybody is on a different journey, and that there's reasons that people present themselves in a certain way, which isn't necessarily good or bad, but again, trying to be truthful or trying to be authentic, depending on what you're trying to experience or what you're trying to get out of certain interactions with individuals is what I wanted to kind of lay out there.
Absolutely. Tim, what are your thoughts on it?
I must have been living under a rock because I don't remember this happening in recent years. I remember this happened to me years and years ago. Like, I remember I got on Yahoo Messenger. That's how long ago this was. But I do remember a few people who were representing themselves as someone else. It was like we'd get into a conversation and I'd be like, well, can I see a picture? Because these were usually from lurkers. And then they would send me a picture of a gainer that I very easily recognized. And I was like, seriously, you're trying to pass this person off as yourself? Like, why wouldn't you choose somebody who's a bit less well known? Like I'm talking about somebody who used pictures of SF gut muscle and tried to pass it off as himself. And I'm like, dude, that's probably the most famous gainer in the entire community. That's somebody who's been around for like 30 years. Like, if you're gonna pretend to be somebody else, don't pick that. But I can't remember this happening to me specifically within, at least not on my time on Instagram.
Sure. Yeah, I was just talking to someone this morning about it actually, and for better or for worse, luckily I have not had this firsthand experience either. I mean, I've seen tons of pictures or users online who do this, but nothing outside just the normal scam artist or normal catfishing artist interaction with me specifically. I'd like to think that, the internet has been around long enough that we're all kind of aware of scams and people who can't send a specific photo. I always like to be like, hey, that's a cute photo, can you send me another selfie? And can you, do the peace sign or do the thumbs up in it too, so I can see, that you're actually using photos that are of who you say you are. And, if they can, they can, and if they can't, then that's kind of the end of the conversation. But I'd like to think that people currently have gotten to the point where they're aware of certain common scam tactics and are conscious that who they're talking to, or what the intent of the conversation is.
I have noticed this happened. I don't know if it's still going on, but it was kind of a problem like maybe a year ago. There was somebody, and I don't know if we ever found out who it was, that would take pictures from a gainer's profile. This was on Instagram. They'd use that. They'd like steal photos. They'd set up this fake account where they would change one letter in the name of the username, or add a number to it so it would be confusing, and then was basically going around and telling everyone, I want to be your sugar daddy, I want to pay for your food, I want to do all this, but you have to send me some money so that it was like, and a few people unfortunately did get caught up in this scam. And I don't know if it's still going on, but I mean, I guess that would be, again, fat fishing. It's someone who's like misrepresenting themselves and says, I want to help you, but I don't know why he has to get money first. Like, that was the part that always confused me. I'm like, why do you have to get money before I get it?
Right.
It's a big question mark, I think, because I think it's easy to say, like, oh, how are people falling for this? And yet people are kind of falling for this. And I think it honestly just seems to come down to someone's willingness to engage with fantasy. They think to themselves, oh, I'm seeing the image of someone either that I recognize and find attractive, or just someone who, maybe I don't recognize, but they fit the brief and I find them attractive, and maybe this is the golden ticket that I've been waiting for. And it's just quite interesting that as a community, we don't seem to have a rubric for, at least contemporarily, keeping people up to date with this kind of stuff and actually moving forward and dealing with it, I think something I noticed with fat fishing is it's quite prevalent in the barren plus size community in the same way that it is in any other, because as you said before, AJ, people want to look like the representation of what is attractive in a space. And so of course people want to misrepresent that. I want to be clear though when saying this, we aren't talking about people who are bloaters or patters in this instance, because the nature of that is intentional. It is intentional to use materials to look in a certain type of way, but that in and of itself is not misrepresentation, so long as you're acknowledging, like, I am a bloater. I'm very bloated right now. As a patter, I'm trying a new shape and I think this looks fantastic. Even if you talk about passability, that's totally fine. But it is the misrepresentation of when someone who is not putting efforts in as a gainer is trying to claim that they are. And as you say, like through the scam of trying to claim money to try and do this. We talked a little bit about this, Tim, before with certain people, the Bruno Barra of it all, people who say that they are gainers or say that they are trying to gain weight and you want to pay money for it, but they're actually not, It kind of brings into question the ability to determine authenticity in an online space. I'm really glad you brought that up, AJ, because really that's what this comes down to. No matter how you want to spin it, it is about who are you talking to and what is the genuine intent of the person you're talking to. Because if there's secrecy and if there's a misdirect going on, it's not just that one person in that one scenario. It is actually like your ability to trust the space that you're in, and that can really damage people's expectations and relations in the space.
And I like that you brought up the fact about fantasy, because sure, I remember on the early days when I was on Twitter, there was one account that I was speaking with that I can remember, and not so much catfishing in a sense that claimed to be someone else, but was hiding in a sense of the photos used were anonymous. It would be like from the lips down, or just hiding identity, but not necessarily faking identity. And at the time, I think I knew that this person was probably too good to be true, but I knew it was a fantasy. This was probably someone that I was never going to meet, but they were hitting all the right buttons in terms of the conversations. So I was enjoying it because I was aware of what I was getting myself into. On the other hand, with app culture and social media, I use a lot of my platforms with the intent to hopefully make friends, lovers, boyfriends, um, off platform, use that as a springboard to interact and then hopefully meet these people in person. So that's where I kind of draw the line with where's my intent going? If I'm happy just chatting with this super hot photo because it's a fantasy and I just need to get off right now, versus is this someone that I can see myself actually meeting in person, and then I'm going to need, a little bit more authenticity from them.
Well, and with the former scenario, I mean, that has its place too. Like
Oh,
I feel
absolutely.
ultimately, those out there who may be fulfilling that particular function where it's just they only want to speak in the realm of fantasy, they only want to present you with a fantasy, as long as that's understood between both parties.
Sure.
That like both people understand that they're most likely never going to meet in real life, and this is not leading towards any romantic connections. I've seen a fair amount of that over the years.
And going back to what you said specifically about, paying people, look at Findom. Look at profiles where, you might never even see the person who you're chatting with, but they hit the buttons right and they make you feel a certain way that you're willing to pay them. But again, you know what you're getting into, you know what you're getting out of it, some kind of expectations. And then that's you're paying. It's like a video game, or a
Or like
sex
a like chatterbait
online.
almost.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
you buy Bitcoin or whatever and you pay the performer. Yeah, it's that kind of situation.
Most definitely. And I think what's really good about this, here at the very top of the episode, what we're talking about is, first of all, an idea of what this fat fishing is, but also, I think a lot of people like to dilly-dally in the kind of amorphous zone of like, oh, well, is it? I don't know. I don't know. Oh, there's this circumstance. And I think what's very clear here is we can all maturely acknowledge that there are scenarios where anonymity is to be respected and can be
Yes.
required. Money can exchange hands, and so long as you're consenting, that's all totally fine. I think
Yeah.
ultimately, to be clear in this episode to the listeners, when we talk about fat fishing, we're not talking about those moments. We are talking very specifically about when there is a sense of that foul play, when there is a sense of an intentional misdirect for some other kind of purpose. And again, this is something that probably many of us can acknowledge that we've participated in when we were younger, and especially within the bear and plus size and gainer communities. Every single one of us has done something, because let's talk about it. We know our angles. Just like when you want to look skintier, you want to take it from up above, facing down. When you want to look bigger, you take it from below. You want the shadow. You want the effects that are going to make the muscles pop, that's going to make the belly look rounder, that's going to make you look taller. These are all things that we have engaged with in the past. And I want to ask you guys here, do you think that that could be considered a part of the fat fishing, or is that part of the more harmless elements of just us trying to represent our quote unquote best selves to people?
I think it could be argued either way. I mean, it's a gray area in between. Um, I guess that's why multiple angles are important, or if you see someone who always takes the same photo, from shoulders up, and you never see something else, and there could be a valid reason behind that too. But I guess if you're doing the detective work of trying to see what this person is like, variety in exposure, variety in representation.
Personally, I think it comes down to intention, like you were saying, James. If the intent is to deceive, then it's no bueno, because that's nothing's good. Nothing good is ever going to come out of that. Even if you have extensive conversations with someone who is intending to deceive you in the first place, it's all going to end badly. I have personal experience, not within the gainer community, but just within life in general, when I meet people who have intention to deceive me from the beginning. So I don't think that it's not really a bad thing to always do from the low angles or certain angles, whatever, because like I do it too. Most of my pictures are from my bathroom because it's the only place in my house with good lighting. So like I'm kind of limited on where I can take photos of myself in a private setting, and I'm sure a lot of other people are under that same restriction depending on who they live with or where they live. Yeah, it doesn't bother me. I think that, again, like I'll say it one more time, if your intention is to deceive, then it's not a good thing.
Right. Well, and in a lot of the gainer communities or forums or platforms, we're dealing with individuals who might not be as comfortable with their current self, and they're using these platforms as an opportunity to explore what is desirable to them personally, but outside of traditional beauty standards. And so taking a photo from a specific angle to be more like, look at this is how I could look, or do I look sexy in this particular stance, could be an opportunity for them to see potential or see an optimistic viewpoint, versus a matter of deception. And I realize this on a lot of these platforms where, you know, looks are desired or different than what is traditionally considered beautiful, that people are not quite sure what they want for themselves or for others, and they're kind of struggling with their own body issues because it kind of goes against what they've been told is pretty, is what's beautiful or handsome their whole lives. And the kind of exciting thing about gaining weight, losing weight, is it fluctuates. It can change, and you can dabble in gaining and feeding and gain a whole bunch of weight, and then you can decide, yeah, I feel sexy, I like the way I look, other people are responding, or no, I don't really like this, and I'm gonna go back to eating clean and healthy and work out a ton and get skinny. It is an opportunity that some people, some easier than others, have the chance to kind of play around with body and see what they like.
Hmm. I think this touches on a number of different episodes we've got in the lexicon. One of our previous episodes, I Am Knuff, focuses entirely on how to feel good enough just as you are right now on your gaining journey. We've talked on a number of different episodes about unlearning the skinny stuff, how to unpack those expectations of body dysmorphia and what we think we should have when it comes to thinness because we're now pursuing fatness. And, I like that you mentioned as well, like trying to represent an idea of what you could look like. I mean, again, bloaters, patters, stuffers, even morphs to a degree probably come under this, and the use of AI art, which could probably be very helpful tools for helping someone to express a sense of the size that they want to accrue, how their body could look like at a certain size. Though, of course, we would always suggest to people, if you want to see a more faithful rendition of what your future may look like, speak to your local gainer artists and talk about getting a commission or paying for a good morph to be done, keep that gainer economy moving. And I think, again, it's that thing of what does it ultimately mean to misrepresent yourself? And I think it's a question of what you get out of it. We've talked about this scenario before. Someone in the community who is very well known, very well received, had a moment a number of years ago now where they confessed that the weight that they were listed as on Grommr was not truthful. In fact, their true weight was maybe near to 100 pounds lighter. And they did a whole thread post about this where they had essentially said, because of the expectations people place on me, I have felt a need to misrepresent myself and to lie, because it's not simply that if I were to tell you that I'm maintaining or tell you that I'm not actively gaining or not being successful in my gains, that people would say, oh, that's okay, you're good as you are. It would be people proactively saying, we hate you, we dislike you because you have deceived us, which is interesting that, there is a sense of, because of this ironic response to apparent deception, this person felt the need to deceive, which, to be clear here, we don't cast any judgment on, because we're all a part of the same micro community that is trying to keep itself going. So we're not throwing shade out to no one, and we're not trying to be any type of way in talking about this. But what I think is important is to understand how potentially we as the masses can lead to people feeling a need to deceive. And I want to ask the pair of you here, do you feel that there are further reflections of this? Are there other scenarios that you can perceive or maybe are aware of where this might be the case?
I feel like 100 pounds is a lot to try and deceive with. I was luckily no, I haven't really run into that as much as inaccurate representation just due to absent-mindedness or neglect. I had a couple profiles on a couple hookup or dating apps where I had my weight considerably larger from when I was considerably larger, and I had lost some weight and just didn't update my weight on those profiles in a few months. And someone actually called me out on it and was like, "Hey, are you really this weight?" And I was like, "Oh shoot, no, actually I'm not. And thank you so much for calling me out on it because I didn't realize I was misrepresenting myself." But again, that was based on just more neglect or absent-minded updating than intentional, purposeful representation.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious in that scenario that you were just caught unaware that you hadn't updated it. So that obvious, it's like that's not an intent to deceive. When it comes to morphs, I find them mostly harmless. Now, I've had photos of me morphed by other people, and I posted them on profiles, and I've said very clearly, this is a morph. This is not what I really look like. Now, if you didn't do that, I suppose you could infer that you're trying to deceive people, but I don't really see that happening a ton, at least not on Instagram. When it comes to AI, I also think it's relatively harmless. Now, if you're going to start charging money for just typing a prompt into a computer and seeing what the image comes up with, I have kind of shaky feelings about that. It's like, I'm not trying to interfere with your bag, but at the same time, like, you're not the one hand drawing this. You're not the one hand painting it. You're not the one who's spending hours creating this image. So if you're going to dabble in AI art, just do it for fun. Like I have the Wonder app, and sometimes I just put stupid shit in there to see what it comes up with, right? For my own amusement, my own entertainment. I'm not selling it to anybody. I'm not saying, hey, aren't I great? You should give me money so that I can do this for you. I still firmly believe if you want good artwork, you find a good artist, you pay them for it. And yeah, they're probably going to charge you a lot of money, but it's because they're spending hours on this, and that's aside from their 9 to 5 job. So I have noticed, so like when you were talking about the misrepresenting of how much, you might actually weigh, the one thing that comes to my mind is the Josh Cedar thing that happened a couple of years ago, because this man had been a reality TV star on The Bachelor. He had started an OnlyFans to, I guess, show off his muscle gains, but nobody gave a damn. And then he decided to become a gainer because I guess he thought that was going to get him the attention he wanted. And I think before he gave up on that, he claimed to have reached 300 pounds. Now, he's a muscular guy, so and obviously muscle weighs more than fat, but when he showed himself off at his 300 pounds, quote unquote, I'm sorry, but he did not look anything close to 300 pounds. Even with my amateur eye, I could tell that this man is not, there's no way, and I think even you said that, James, when you saw it.
Something I want to actually reference here that comes to mind is the moment in which models and influencers on Instagram were obliged to note that posts that they were posting were paid promotion. And the reason for that is you need to reference instances like Fire Festival and other memeable moments that have occurred in the last 20 years, but how misrepresentation can often lead to really negative recourse. In the case of Fire Festival, for anyone who is somehow not aware of this, a whole bunch of people basically said this is the most hip happening thing that's going to be happening, and then it was a fucking nightmare. It was so poorly put together. And of course, because there were nothing but influencers there, people posted about it, and then everyone was like, oh my god. But the whole point is, the reason why paid promotion was brought in was because people noted that the effect it has on people is insurmountable, because easily demonstrable. The fact that you promote something as, oh, this is real and legitimate, someone goes for it and it's not real. You have to put something there that says this is paid promotion. That's how you say out of the courts. In a similar way, if you are promoting yourself as someone who, oh, I live this kind of a lifestyle and I eat all this food and you can do it too. Someone does it and then they wind up in trouble. Baby, they're going to point to you and say, like, oh, this is not great. And yes, there's the fantasy. Yes, there's all these things. But there can be very real world ramifications for misrepresentation. And I think, much like you all have mentioned, if something is a morph, if something is padding or bloating, making sure that that's included in the text, making sure that you make a point to say, this is what this is, or at the very least, include it in the hashtags. Do something to be intentional and show that what you're doing is not a misrepresentation, but it is a demonstration of the fantasy.
I mean, and to that point, like about the morphing and the other photo editing things that can be done, if you tag the person who did it for you, I mean, that's always, if I were the one who was doing the work and someone, and I wouldn't charge, but if someone was like, hey, I'd really love for you to morph a picture of me, and I did it, and I'd be like, just tag me, let people know that I did this.
I think the way that AI and morphed photos or shopped photos has evolved in the last few years, and the way we're going to see that continue to evolve just in the next short few months is both exciting and really, really scary. I feel like there is still at a place where you can tell where an image is AI generated. And I have a lot of experience with photo editing and online morphing, I guess, if you will. And it's easy for someone like me with that background to be able to tell and differentiate between a photo that's been altered and one that isn't. But with the rate that computers and AI is learning, I don't know if that'll be as discernible coming up. And I have to check my privilege because, like, I had a friend who posted a photo on Facebook and it was one of him that was just kind of like a glamour shot AI filter that, just kind of smoothed lines and wrinkles, got rid of pores. But I was like, girl, look at this photo of you. Look at this crazy AI. And he had said something like, you are the only person who actually said something about that. So I have to think that, maybe to the discernible eye, yes, but it might not be as easy to tell to other people, so you got to kind of keep that in mind. My one drawback for morphs or altered images in that sense is that it still kind of presents us to unachievable beauty desires or beauty standards, regardless of what those are. If I get a morphed photo of me, and I'm 300 pounds of chubby muscle with a 14-inch penis and hair all over my body, am I gonna just look at these the same way I looked at bodybuilding or fitness magazines as a kid and think I'm never gonna be able to attain this?
There you go.
Do you think in a strange way, this is kind of our community's way of doing what the sort of entertainment, beauty, and fashion industry does to everybody else?
Absolutely. And you want to know why? Because we've talked about this on a previous episode. We have to remember that as gainers, we are not separate from the world. We are a part of the world. We are a part of the zeitgeist. There is a reason why we as gainers have to unpack our fat phobia in the same way that people who are black need to unpack their racism, and people who are gay, trans, queer need to unpack their homo, trans, and queer phobia. Because we come from the majority who taught us those same negative values. That is the way they act. As a queer person, I did not, when I decided to come out as gay, go, oh, all of my internal misogyny, all the ways in which I have been raised with a hyper-masculine ideal and privilege have been totally wiped. Absolutely not. All I did was transfer them from women and put them onto men. The ability to resolve that tension comes from within, and it is work. It is active work that we all have to do. It is the same thing with fat phobia. And in a community where we do not resolve that for ourselves, all we will ever do ultimately is recreate the exact same power structures that exist in the wider world, because why would we do anything different? We would only ever create the exact same shit we have seen before. So this is why the concept of fat fishing needs to be spoken about, because as we have discussed, there are spaces in which there is a legitimate reason for it and it has its confines. There is a space in which perhaps a little bit of it isn't seen as truly fat fishing. It's just the way in which we function as people. But in that amorphous zone comes the excuses, comes the reasons, and which becomes the building blocks of that exact framework, just like you were saying, Tim. So it's important that we can recognize it and begin to unpack it. What is the goal of representing ourselves in a way in which we are not authentically? What is the purpose? And as you say, AJ, maybe those purposes aren't actually for our betterment. Maybe they are the ways in which we're just reflecting the exact same trauma we had before we came into our own gaining journeys, just putting it in a different direction. Which amazes me that we look the fact that it's going up the scales and we go, oh, that's totally fine, as if going down the scales was the problem at all. No, it's not about your weight changing. That's not what determines whether or not a diet or a psychosomatic process is good or bad. It is about what is ultimately the result of pertaining to that process. And I think that's what we've got to be very considerate of.
That process, and I read a book, and it talked about the future of AI specifically, but I think we can broaden that. And it said something like, we have basically little baby Superman that flew in from a different planet for human, and it's a baby right now, which was, they were talking about AI. And we as humans can raise this little baby like the Kents did and teach him about moral values and using your power for good. Or, given into the wrong hands can turn into a supervillain. Luckily, in the Superman story, he was raised by the Kents, he became a superhero and used his powers for good. They were alluding that AI and generation of content, whether it be graphics, text, literature, art, music, could go anywhere at this point. It's still little baby Superman, and how we determine to, quote, raise this child will determine the future of our planet and how we want to use that. And I think that can definitely be broadened to just, the human psyche, the human experience. We create our truth and we create the journey that we want to be on, and how do we present that to be in a way that's most beneficial to us as a society and us just as humans and individuals.
I guess it didn't really dawn on me until this conversation that a lot of what we've been talking about and, kind of building, I guess, a false image of yourself or whatever, has a pretty profound impact on perhaps those who maybe have not developed a strong sense of self yet, and how they could be easily misled.
100%. We've talked about this when it comes to even the simple conversation around a gainer diet. I was 100 pounds when I joined the gainer community. I'm asking people, what do I do to gain weight? Do go mad, eat junk food, drink oil. Because we see the fantasy, and then we've got people who get really, really big and present themselves in a way, and they go, yeah, I did this by living on the gainer fantasy. And so we treat that as verbatim, as we go, oh, well, that's the evidence. That's proof in pudding. You have to do this. And I've shared before how a large part of my gaining journey, I have been filled with struggles because I couldn't get my brain to reconcile why this wasn't working. And it was only at the point when I started to look at the process for myself and substantiate my own gains for me, by me, of me, with no one else involved, that I actually begun to see the error of what I was doing. And through making those relevant changes, finally started to gain some real weight. Because this is the thing, the process I go on in my gains is not necessarily going to be the process that everyone else goes on to. And that's okay. But when we turn around and we say, just do this and everything will fall into your lap, when we turn around and we say, this is the model, when we turn around and say there is only one way, or we live in our fantasy. Do you know how many people I still get in my DMs? I'll post a belly pic, I'll feel good about that, and I'll be like, oh, I just ate a whole pizza. Oh, that's lame. Didn't even eat 2, didn't even eat 3. And it's like, what are you saying? You don't know me. I'm
So you
fucking
can't win.
You know, it's like I'm fucking fat on one pizza. Good for me. But it's they've got this idea in their head because we talk about these fantasies as if they are reality and we don't ever challenge that conversation. I mean, for goodness sake, this goes all the way back to fantasy versus reality right back in season one. So much of this is just tied together in what is real about what we're doing. And in that point, AJ, I want to come to you here because you expressed on the Thicc stream and you've expressed, just now, just chit chatting, you have been on a body journey. And I imagine that within that, there is this real conversation on how you represent yourself and how you feel in the space and how that maybe informs your goals and your direction. Do you feel comfortable sharing some of that with the listeners today?
Absolutely, yeah. And to get on more of a personal journey, I have always been a big guy. I was a heavy kid growing up. Early in my high school journey, I lost a whole bunch of weight, learned about what I could be eating versus might want to eat. Got pretty skinny for a bit, but never really felt comfortable in my skin. Then I kind of got stuck in the, weighing myself every day and, counting calories excessively. And it's funny because the just I think with growing up and just being more mature, you kind of realize what matters in life, and the people who want to be around you are the ones that accept you for who you are. So it's not as big of a deal of that outside portrayal. But I found just in my own personal journey that confidence is sexy, and presenting yourself, if you're lucky enough to be confident, that that's the that's the sexiest thing, regardless what size you are. And if you can learn to be happy at your current size, that's most important. Because what is the perfect ideal size? And is that attainable for every single person? Probably not. But can you be happy with good enough, or even better with where you're at currently? But yeah, I've gained, I've lost, I've exercised a lot, I've eaten a lot. I'm the kind of person who I don't have trouble gaining. I look at food and I put on weight. So I'm fascinated to go back to like what you said about gainer diets or recommendations, and there's so many people out there, registered dietitians, nutritionists, even personal trainers, who can help individuals with losing weight or dropping body fat. I would like to do some research into what individuals are out there with having you try, or having one try and gain weight. And yes, that can involve some unhealthy or more fantasy driven roles. But, again, bringing it back to reality, there has to be some level of health or caution in doing so to keep you in a state that'll keep you alive. And we can veer that fantasy in a different episode. But you want to gain, you want to be healthy but still have the body that you want. And chugging a whole bunch of oil probably is not going to be the healthiest or safest way to get there. I can have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and I'll gain weight. So it's like talking to a variety of different people to get where you want to be, I think is important, because again, differentiating between fantasy and reality, but also knowing what works for your body isn't going to be what's working for everybody. And kind of just like exercising, you kind of figure out what works for you, what doesn't. It's a lot of trial and error, but that's just kind of the journey, the body journey. You dabble and you see what works and what doesn't, and you kind of have to just be open to exploring what you like, what you don't, and what works for you.
I mean, this touches on a point that I know that I've spoken about in the past, which is, it's not that I think people should or shouldn't have to eat a certain diet if they do or don't want to gain weight, but I think, as you say, when we only present one option, you have to drink the oil, you have to have a junk food diet, you must do this. Maybe that doesn't appeal to everyone. And that probably locks people out of the journey and makes them feel like one thing is or isn't accessible. Maybe, as you were saying before, this idea that if people feel discouraged in something, maybe that might drive them to do more of the fat fishing. Maybe that's what's going to help drive the fantasy, because if they feel they can't live in reality, they're going to live in fantasy mode. you know? And it's interesting the direction that people will go to with fantasy. I one time encountered a guy through Instagram who seemed to be like a legitimate feeder and was really eager to send me food. When I tell you this man said he was going to place an order for me, and he's like, how does steak and chips sound? I was like, oh, that sounds really good. This man straight up like went to Google Images, took a like downloaded a photo of a steak and chip dinner, and then sent it to me.
That was his idea of feeding you,
That was his idea of feeding me, and I was like,
emailing you a JPEG.
yeah, girly, it just low
I would
res.
have been like, I would have been like, thanks. That's kind of a dick thing to do,
Like
but
I was so and when I tell you, because obviously I clap back at this guy being like, what the fuck is this? And he's like, oh, what? And like through the chat seemed genuinely disconcerted. Regardless, I blocked him. I said, this is not cool. No goodbye. Because regardless, that's not my responsibility to have to teach you on. But also, it's interesting that sometimes people really don't know the difference between the expectations of reality and fantasy. Sometimes people don't delineate the two of those, and it's really important that we make that clear. Especially when, AJ, as you were saying, talking about your body journey, you find it easy to gain weight, you've gone up and down, your motivations have shifted over time, and that's totally fine as well. And I think sometimes as gainers, we don't consider that we're allowed to also have a change to our wants. You know, there are certainly people in this community who, when they go through periods of wanting to lose weight, they delete their profiles or they go
Yeah.
inactive for a long time. Partly because, as people have confessed before, they'll say, I don't want to be losing weight and see people succeeding in their gains because that's a bit triggering. I think that's totally fair and respectful. But we know people who have gone through the weight loss process and basically said, yeah, I deleted all my shit because I didn't want to be verbally abused by people.
Right.
And that
Well,
is rough.
and certain platforms, I think the variety of kinks or interests or fetishes that are available help prevent that from happening as extremely, because if you're on a site where you're either a fat gainer or a muscle gainer or a chaser, you know, there's more room for people to have varied interests. If you, let's say, were just on a fat gaining site and you decided you wanted to lose weight, then you might be ostracized because, the intentions were a little bit more focused. But I've seen, sites that have more broad variety of interests. So I would hope that those changes would lead to people being a little bit more supportive just because there's a variety of reasons why people are on there. I know that's an ideal situation and people can still be hurtful. But yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to just, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. I've seen people who, I was like, oh, people have gained weight, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you were so cute before. You're still cute now, but I liked you skinny. And then on the other hand, I have people that are like, oh my gosh, you look adorable, that you're a little bit chunkier now. And it's not a personal preference in terms of liking a specific size. I think for me, it's more like what works best for an individual. But I'm not going to say those things to their face. I'm not going to say you should lose weight or you should gain weight because you look better, as long as these people are happy with their journey, and if they said something to me, about how they're feeling, then I could bring up suggestions or preferences, and that might be an exciting way to open the door about broader communities or these niche communities that we're a part of that other individuals might not be aware of while they're exploring sexuality and personal growth and personal body image. But again, I'm not gonna be mean for the sake of being mean or rain on someone's parade because I have a personal preference of how they should look.
Mm.
I sometimes wonder if it's the isolating nature of this fetish that leads to most of this. Because if you think about it, like most people, when they discover this about themselves, they feel alone. They feel like nobody else is like me. Then they discover an online community of people full of people like them. They get excited. They dabble for, a number of years. They dabble around, they play in the sandbox, they get to know people, and then I often wonder if, like, when they kind of focus their negative attention on someone who might be trying to change their body journey, go in a different direction or whatever, I can't help but wonder if it's because they feel like, well, I'm never going to meet this person. I'm never, or even if I do have the opportunity to meet this person, now I'm not going to see them at their fat prime, quote unquote. Now they're changing the rules on me. They've changed the story, whatever. It's like now I'm going to have to, meet them and be disappointed, or maybe they feel like, well, I'm never going to meet them anyway, so it doesn't matter what I say to them,
You
you
know,
know?
I've certainly said this before, but mostly as a warning to listeners. We have to be very careful about how we engage with people in this community because people talk, and if you are not treating people with respect, everyone around you is going to find out real fucking fast because people talk. And the community is of such a small size that you can't really afford that if you want to remain connected to it. So it is very important that we are mindful about how we represent ourselves, even just, as you say, even in the text, even in the base communication of the thing. But I want to come back to something you said, AJ, which is the whole sense of, people can feel a need to represent themselves in a type of way, maybe to garner certain more attention. And we can all have our own thoughts and feelings about how someone appears, but if we choose kindness over maybe that instinct to make a cutting remark, maybe that will give someone more space to feel at peace with who they are. I mentioned before the Knuff episode. Yes, we need to focus on that for ourselves, but how we also speak to other people is also something that can be of help. We can help to influence situations in a positive way by not being dicks. And I wonder if maybe that is also an element that contributes to the fat fishing. If maybe as a community that prizes people of a certain size and shape above all else, it creates an environment where people feel like they have to do that in order to garner any of the attention or any of the accolades. We've also talked about this in our episodes about encouragers and admirers. It makes sense that in a community about gaining, fatness and size are centered. Perfect. We don't get to see that in the major world. This is a good thing. But I really struggle to find any instance where people really lift up encouragers and chasers and admirers and feeders as, I love these people and I love what they do and what they contribute. And I wonder if that's maybe why people might represent themselves in a type of way, because if you're never going to get the shine despite all of that work, maybe that's why some people do that. You know what I mean?
Well, and I like the idea too of being able to worship or appreciate or embrace other people's bodies, even if it's not a goal that you set for yourself or a standard that you see how you want to look,
And I've
and
said many times, make no mistake, just because I am a gainer and I have a preference for larger men, it does not mean that I am not attracted to skinny men. I have been with skinny men, I've been with super chubs, and I have been just as into the body of the Twinkie boy that wants to feed me donuts and call me daddy as the super chub that, I'm the one on my knees worshiping his gut, you know.
yeah, shoot your shot, I think nobody just wants vanilla ice cream for dessert every night, sometimes you're in the mood for chocolate or strawberry, and a lot of us have different types or different interests, and
Mm.
that's an opportunity for anybody to go up and give a compliment, strike up a conversation, and see what happens. You don't want to just have a regret on a maybe or a never because you didn't give
I
the
mean, as a
opportunity.
gay man, as I am attracted to men, I am sexually attracted to men. I am attracted to the shape of men. I am attracted to the look of men, the smell, all of it. Like I am just into men. So it doesn't matter if it's a skinny man or a super fat man. It's if my brain says this is a man, I'm sexually attracted to it.
Yeah, fair enough. And again, coming back to this point on what we can do to be more supportive of one another, because I wonder if that, again, if that is just the kernel of where all this comes from. We need more of that support. Like, AJ, for yourself, as you say, you've gone on that journey, you've been up and down, you've been through it. In your experience, what has been the biggest help that other people have provided you that has given you a greater sense of that grounding for yourself?
I think that, again, that authentic exposure, just putting yourself out, but also having a support system that you can trust, and that individuals will like you for who you are and want to be around you because of who you are. I have friends who have stuck by me at any age, shape, or form. And, they don't even know when I've lost weight, gained weight, put on muscle, lost muscle, because that's not what they're after. They're not there to judge or see me in that light. Um, But, just putting myself out there, whether it's, an opportunity to have my shirt off or go to a specific party, or an opportunity where, I can just be myself. And that's what shines through, is where I get my confidence from. And, certain people don't like that, but the ones that matter, they do like that.
Honestly, for me, I think it's the fact that I have the self-confidence that I have right now that causes other people to treat me in a certain way, because as the weight went up, I didn't begin to get insecure about it. I didn't try to hide myself. I didn't try to make excuses for it if anyone brought it up. I and very few people did, but the couple that did bring it up, like, oh, you've put on weight. I was like, yeah, I have, big, the sky is blue. Who cares? And I think that inspires other people to treat you as a confident person. It's like AJ was saying earlier, how confidence is key. And I can't tell you the secret to how to gain it. It's something that is different for everybody. And some people go through their whole lives and never gain it. And I often, again, mention my late husband in this, is like, because of all the shit that he put me through, I kind of feel like nobody can ever put me through anything as bad as that. And that's just sort of been my motto from that point on. It's like, you can't do to me what he did. So anything that you try to do to me is going to be just, why should I give a shit? Who are you?
Yeah, I think ultimately when someone is catfishing or fatfishing, they are misrepresenting themselves because they want to receive something positive in return. We've talked about the examples of the scam artists or the people trying to actually put something really intentionally negative out there. That is very much its own thing. But when we talk about people who are misrepresenting themselves because they want acceptance, because they want the accolades, my heart breaks for that, because ultimately we are a community that lauds the potential of transformation as something everyone can attain. It is available to everyone. It will be lauded and uplifted and celebrated. And yet accolades are kept away. I have gained 100 pounds. I talk about this all the time. I still get people who message me thinking I'm an encourager, because I, in their minds, am not fat enough to qualify being a gainer, despite having gained 100 pounds, which is more than what half the people in this community have done. But that's not what matters to them. What matters is this idea, this visual. That's a projection they put on me. And when I think about how I move through those moments, it is reminding myself, they're all going to die someday. But legitimately, what I remind myself of is that they don't know who I am. They don't know the work I put in. And when I want to be reminded of the acceptance I do have for the work that I put in, I reach out to the people who know that truth of me. So in fact, the best way to overcome this desire to misrepresent myself is to force myself to be more authentic, is to develop greater senses of community with the people around me who hold me and uplift me the way that I need to be held and uplifted. Which is another question in and of itself. People think, how much can I lean on someone? How much can I do this? Tim, you and I have said this to each other before. As two people who are friends and are not sexually attracted to one another, how far can you and I go with certain words and phrasings and compliments before it feels a bit inappropriate? How much can we do this for one another? And the reality is, there is no limit. There is only what we decide there is. And if we as two friends who love one another can decide to say, you're looking really sexy today. You look fucking fantastic. I bet that dick be swanging. Like, it doesn't have to be an uncomfortable thing, because it's a genuine reflection of the love I have for you as a person. And then it's given and held in reception. In receiver. It's received. Hello.
In Reseda.
In Reseda. Sorry, my hairline's in Reseda.
What's it doing in California?
I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, y'all motherfuckers know what I'm saying. I honestly think that the real answer to all of this is just more authenticity, more connection. And AJ, this is your platform, authenticity. What for you is ultimately what drives your authenticity? Where does that come from, and how do you find it? How do you develop it? What has that been like for you?
I mean, one quote that always comes back to me is just, the truth is easiest to remember. It's a lot of hard work to try and pretend to be someone else or be something that you're not, or what did I tell this person, or, particular image that gets out that, might not be as accurate. It's just easier to just be myself. I don't have to think about it. And like I said, the right kind of people are going to appreciate that, and they're going to like me for who I am. I'm tired of putting myself out there to try and impress others. I'm just going to do my own thing and see where the pieces fall, and hopefully the right people will appreciate that. I think open and honest communication is the biggest thing. If you want to compliment a dear friend of yours that you're not sexually attracted to and tell them they look sexy, and that is a little bit uncomfortable, I would hope that they would want to tell you, hey, that's going a little bit too far, because you don't know what kind of state you're in or relationship status is you're in based on lack of communication. And sometimes it might go too far, sometimes it's just far enough. But as long as you all are open and honest with each other, I think that's the most important.
And I found for the most part, a lot of people are upfront about that. Like we know gainers that fall somewhere on the asexual spectrum, and they've been very clear about, I never want to see any nudes. I don't want you to use certain language when you talk to me. And that's totally fine.
Yeah, just have fun about it. Let me know.
I think ultimately, we've talked, I think, a lot around fat fishing and what it all means and what are these different scenarios. And I think what we're coming down to is, as much as there is this broad spectrum of what it could or could not be, a lot of that depends on perspective. And I think so long as we know what's up, everything's going to be fine. This comes back to that point on authenticity. And as you were saying, AJ, honesty is easiest. Like, if you are just truthful about things, like, you don't have to worry about, like, what story you're trying to spin or what numbers you out here giving. Just be yourself and talk. Just deliver that,
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know that I have posted photos trying to appear larger than I am. I don't know that I've tried to misrepresent myself in the past. But I do find that what I'm experiencing today, through the podcast, through these conversations, through amicable conversation on my current weight gain journey, is I feel very much at peace. And when I have conversations with people who understand me in my journey and I say, this is my weight, this is where I'm at, I don't feel that judgment. And then I go, oh, great. I get to just chill now. There's no anxiety of being found out or an anxiety of not being seen as good enough. There is only the peace that comes from friends who love and respect me, which is great. Just to ask here, does anyone have any particular points or things they want to bring up before we wrap up this episode?
No, I think I'm good.
I do want to bring up on that point that I think we are in a lucky situation where we feel confident that we can be ourselves and that we have the opportunity to be true and not hide behind a screen or a fake photo, even because I know so many people in the country, let alone the world, don't have the opportunity to be themselves in whatever capacity that means in terms of sexuality or gender expression or fetish or kink. But I think that's the most important thing, is to try and live your truth.
I think something that we need to do en masse in this community is just try to get people to stop putting their expectations off on each other. We I get why it happens, because this is a realm that does involve a lot of fantasy, a lot of fantasizing, a lot of describing what your fantasies, gainer fiction, for God's sake. We've talked about how that can influence people's ideas about what's supposed to happen. We just got to stop doing that. It's got to be allowing people the space to be upfront about what they want and the kind of interactions that they want to have with people and the kind of things that they want to do in the community, and just giving them the space to say, this is who I am, this is what I want. And if it doesn't gel with what you want, then go find somebody else. There are thousands of people in the community who I'm sure would be more than happy to fulfill your every fantasy, but that's not every single person who claims to be a part of the gainer community. We shouldn't be putting our expectations off on other people, because that is how we ultimately get to a place of people who feel that they need to deceive others, or they feel that they need to present themselves as something more than what they really are. This is all bowing to pressure that is put on them by us as members of the community. So we've got to do something about that if we want these problems to start to diminish.
I agree. And on that point, AJ, I want to say thank you. for being your authentic self with us here today, as you are every day. Thank you for sharing your experiences, for bringing such excellence to this podcast. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Where can people find you online, doll?
Most of my socials are at bearwithaj, BEARWITHAJ. Yeah, and I've got some exciting things coming up. I create content. I have a lot of fun online. I'm based in Los Angeles, so you can see me out and about. I do a lot of traveling, so stay tuned, see where I am next.
Fabulous. Well, that's it for another fabulous episode of Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at ThickyMouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or at our website at podpage.com/ThiccRadio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes, and you can always write to us at thethiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stannnum and Thicky Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.